you quote a paper in the book where austerity caused Brexit. And it's this kind of like, the system hasn't worked for me, so I'm going to push against it and find something new. And austerity is that it's like the economic system has been cut to the bone, basically, or, the cuts are...
Well, if you look at what austerity did, which I argued very passionately against it at the time, both, so this is not... sometimes I was right at the time. I would argue I'm usually right at the time, but not always, for sure. But the government we had after the crisis came to power in 2010, Cameron Osborne, inherited a huge fiscal deficit. It was clear because the economy has shrunk so much. And they decided to blame this crisis on the fiscal policy of its predecessor, Labour, which was certainly dishonest, as I pointed out many times at the time. And they said, we must get rid of this fiscal deficit because it's too big, and if we don't, we'll end up like Greece. Well, I think that was nonsense too, but they argued this. But then they made a really crucial decision, the crucial decision, I think. Okay, they could have said we need to close the deficit over the next 4 or 5 years. That's what they ended up doing. But they could have said, okay, we'll raise taxes, that'll count for half of it, and we'll cut spending, that'll count for a half, and that's sort of safe. And when we cut spending, we'll make sure it doesn't hurt the poorest. That would have been a just way of doing it, I think. But in fact, I don't know the exact figure, but something like 80% of the adjustment of the fiscal position was done by spending cuts. And most of that, a huge proportion, was done through cuts in local authorities' spending, and where the cuts were savage. And local authorities provide a lot of services that really matter for ordinary people, particularly vulnerable people, like looking after social care in the community, that sort of thing. And that's particularly important in those areas of the country where they already have considerable poverty, like Northeast England, I think, which is where so many people ended up voting for Brexit and for Boris Johnson. So they suddenly found their lives, which were already very difficult. These are the relatively poorest parts of the country, the former mining and industrial areas. The services they were getting were really being decimated. And actually other services, slow deterioration of the NHS, the standards of welfare provision more generally, except pensions. So these people felt something is going wrong. They didn't understand. Why should they? The arithmetic of the fiscal adjustment that was being imposed. I mean, it would be unreasonable to expect most citizens to understand fully how the fiscal position of the government works. I mean, that's a specialist subject. Really, relatively few people understand how this works. So they felt things are getting very badly wrong. They can't get any worse, quote unquote, famous sort of notion. So we need to vote for change. Yeah. Brexit was the only change on offer. They didn't really trust Jeremy Corbyn, as it turned out. And so Brexit became a vote for change. Unfortunately, it wasn't a vote for change that will benefit those people. As I think they've subsequently discovered. But that, I think, is what happens. Once people get unhappy with the status quo and with the leaders who are seen to personify the status quo, I think people they won't decide not to vote for anything, or not to vote for anything particular. They will, as it were, vote for anything that looks like a viable protest.
That's a clip from our chat with Martin Wolf. What a talker. If you want to see the man chat, click the link right here.